Well, I'm just going to get started and we'll have more people joining us as we go on. We have the benefit of talking on the evening of the 99th day of the new Trump administration with Skye Perryman, the head of Democracy Forward, who has been a key voice in court every day over the past 99 days, it feels like, um, with with dealing with what we've got here. And so what we're going to try to do over the next 30 minutes is break down sort of uh, where we started from, what happened, where we're going, and hopefully a little bit of what Skye thinks we've learned. So I mean, I guess just to start, Skye, I mean, coming in uh, to this second Trump administration, you and I talked about democracy forward being ready for it, and what did that entail? I think that's something that uh, as we got underway, that a lot of people want to know, like, what were people doing ahead of time, like what did you do to get ready?
Well, we knew that we knew from the first Trump administration and from what we've seen with right wing leaders in some states and communities across the country that when an extreme movement or an extreme person tells you what they're going to do, you need to believe them. And so when we started in 2023, at the end of 2023, we saw the publication of Project 2025. Much of that, as you know, Chris, and you've covered, actually was rehashing things that the former Trump administration had done or tried to do, and then there was new things on top of that. And then, of course, we have this ecosystem of far right legal organizations that have been trying to reverse people's rights in the courts as opposed to protect people's rights in the courts, that have a range of favorite hobby horses too. So our organization took all of that at Democracy Forward. We took sort of what was in Project 2025, what we had seen from the playbook with other far right organizations, and then what we knew from the first Trump administration, and developed a threat matrix about what would happen if the federal landscape regressed and if the Trump administration, made a choice, which they've clearly chosen, to not govern on behalf of the national community, to not turn over a new leaf, but to really sort of accelerate what is a very extreme and frankly anti-democracy agenda. So we put it all together, and then many of the things that the administration seeks to do are just flat out unlawful um, on their face. I mean, they almost gleefully brag about it in documents like Project 2025. And so we knew that we needed to develop some legal theories, start thinking about which people and communities would be harmed by certain things and what type of representation they would need in the courts. And so that's what we did. And then we worked with a lot of other organizations and launched an initiative that some of your listeners and readers know about called Democracy 2025, which is really just a representation of all the groups that are on the front lines of civil society using the law to protect people's rights. And folks can learn more about that at democracy2025.org or more on our website at Democracy Forward. But that's reading the stuff and taking it seriously. It wasn't just a political talking point, right? These were serious plans that needed to be taken seriously. And that's what we really sought to do.
And I mean, as it got underway, I mean, you and I had a chance to meet a little bit in, and it already had sort of developed quickly in a different way than the first time around, because they did have Project 2025, and just bluntly, I mean, they had already been in the White House once, and so they did know some of the corners. They weren't just running into the wall every day. Um, in sort of that first month, what was the big sort of warning signs for you? What sort of, how did you have to adjust your plan?
There were warning signs, and then there were good signposting about strategies. So some of the warning signs and things that like weren't on the bingo card, even though we made a very extensive bingo card, was certainly the president's appointment of Elon Musk and the way in which Doge was seeking to operate, it wasn't clear. In the transition, we knew that Doge was operating at least as an unlawful advisory commission at that time. It seemed like that there was plans to have it really advise the government. It was advising the government. It wasn't disclosing what it needed to disclose under the law. But as in the first days of the administration, we started seeing things that were much different than that. Breaking into federal buildings, seeking to take or access terabytes of data, individual data on Americans. So that was one big piece that we've now challenged and won many court orders regarding, but that was one piece that was not on that we had to adjust around. And I think the other pieces is we knew that this was a administration that if they did what they said they were going to do, they were really going to try to weaponize the government against the people. That's everything from like the funding freezes we saw to attacks on data and evidence to attacks on the civil service and retribution. I think what we didn't know was exactly the mechanisms they would do or how broad it would be early on. I mean, it really was this shock and awe, like I said. And we were able to adjust quickly. We got in on the funding freeze. We were able to get in the first, before it went into effect and secure a nationwide order that remains in effect today, stopping that. We've been able to move, but I think we knew we were going to need to move quickly. I think really experiencing how quickly that was is obviously something that requires some adjustment with the way in which lawyers operate, right? Because we're not, like I say, democracy forward is powered by humans, not by AI. So, it really requires that we move fast, but we have been, and we've been able to move fast and get in, as much as possible.
And I mean, what in terms of like the sort of breadth and scope of where they have been moving, what sort of how do you think, like, are there categories of litigation? Are there like, how are you thinking about sort of like what is the case against the Trump administration right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like three categories broadly of pushback litigation that's required to defend people's rights in this time. One is the category of cases where the administration is really seeking to decimate or undermine the constitutional rights that people have, which, like, the president doesn't get to do that. So that's everything from birthright citizenship to some of the attempts, for instance, to restrict the First Amendment by telling people you can't say the word equity on a website, or all these
Mhm.
things. So that's one category. One category is sort of who and what is influencing the government, what the accountability infrastructure, transparency ecosystem is, which they're seeking to attack. So that's what I would call, our civil service litigation, the litigation against Doge, the litigation against, we're going to start seeing, just watch, we'll come back and talk about, we'll start seeing now at the agency level appointments of people that either haven't gone through the right process or advisory commissions that are not complying with transparency laws or efforts to sort of undermine the Freedom of Information Act, those types of things. That's like who and what gets to influence the government and what that transparency infrastructure is. One, and then the third case, which might be third category, which is sort of one that I think means a lot to people, is what I call the kitchen table category, right? The steps that the administration is taking across a range of issues and in a range of ways that are deeply harmful to the individual experience that Americans are having across the board every single day. You're going to go in and without any explanation at all and any authority at all, freeze all federal funding in the country, putting things like Meals on Wheels and Head Start in the balance. You're going to take American social security data, right? The data that, like, we trust the government, where there's an implicit trust, everybody's got a social security number, and do something with this personal data on individual Americans. That kitchen table, those kitchen table issues. And then you have things like our case with the ACLU that you've covered a lot of, the Alien Enemies Act case, where we're co-counseling with ACLU. And that's sort of both in category one and category,
Right.
right? Because they're seeking to sort of completely eviscerate due process. So he's seeking with the stroke of a pen to, to invalidate constitutional rights. But then at the same time, that's a kitchen table issue, because if you can remove people from the country without any process at all, that doesn't bode well for any of us. And we're seeing the public opinion polls, including the ones over the weekend out of ABC News, really show that people in America across the country are like getting this is a real threat. So those are the categories that I see, and kind of, and I think that we're going to continue to just need to see volumes of litigation in all three of those categories.
Yeah, I think just to roadmap for people. I think that people are really interested in the Doge litigation and the Alien Enemies Act litigation, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that. The Doge litigation, I think we saw sort of a wild sort of breaking now today news today that in the challenge to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's uh, agency-wide RIF, that sort of the DC Circuit had somewhat allowed it to go forward, and as long as there was like a particularized assessment, and then like 4 days later they tried to RIF 90% of the agency. And we just got a ruling today from that included Judge Katsas basically switching sides and saying, no, we're going to put firings on hold until the DC Circuit can decide this, not even waiting for Judge Amy Berman Jackson at the district court to deal with it. I mean, how much of what Doge is doing, one, is illegal, and two is actually sort of like shooting the Trump administration in their own foot.
Well, let me say this thing that happened today, and frankly, what's happened on Alien Enemies Act and a range of other things, shows you that the gamble that the administration is trying to make, to thumb their nose at the courts, is not paying off for them. I mean, they are hurting themselves when just being silent and kind of following the court order would do them far better, right? And so I just want to point that out, because we're seeing that across the board where they're just not, they're seeking to undermine what judges, even judges that are kind of ruling for them in a little bit, is really turning off the judiciary. Of course, it's a violation of the rule of law. We know American people are very concerned about that. But to your point on Doge, I again think this is a place where they cannot get out of their own way. I mean, they have much of what they have done is unlawful, especially when they're not even being clear about what they are doing. So judges are highly skeptical of that, and we've had some
Right.
judges that haven't issued emergency orders immediately, but have called and said like, "But you can take depositions, or we want to hear testimony," because nobody thinks the government just gets to do stuff and not explain to a court or to the people what they're doing. I think the Doge cases really are kind of threefold. There's the data cases, which is what are they doing with data? Are they authorized to access it? What are they doing with it? Have people been vetted? Have protocols been followed? Is the Privacy Act being violated, which in our cases, many times it is? Um, then there's the sort of, we're going to take a sledgehammer to the civil service, which they're trying to do in part through Doge. That's the RIF cases, or even these agency decimation cases. Much of that is not lawful either, because Congress
Right.
set up these agencies to do certain things. And you're seeing we're in the USAID case. We're watching the CFPB case very closely. We're in the Department of Ed case. We represent, doing some of the smaller agencies too. You see that. And then there's this transparency piece around Doge, which is that, like, from day to day, the president, should Elon Musk have been appointed and confirmed by the Senate? What is the role of Musk? What is the role of the people that are there? That transparency piece. So I think there's like three categories, and in many instances, we've not seen federal courts say that anything Doge is doing is quote unquote lawful. We have seen some of them be willing to sort of let Doge operate a little bit while they explore, and then others that feel like they have to block it because of this
Right.
irreparable harm.
And I mean, when and this is sort of a big picture question, and let's just bite the bullet. I mean, I think there's a lot of concern that, to the extent that there are court rulings, that the Supreme Court isn't going to go along with it. That when they get to the Supreme Court, it's not going to go well. Um, I have my thoughts on that. I'd love to hear like how is it that you're thinking about the Supreme Court? What concerns do you have about the Supreme Court? Do you think that they're ultimately going to stand up to Trump or not?
Well, I think that every day that this administration makes a decision, which it's made in a number of instances, to contend that court orders are optional or that the judicial process is a nuisance to them, is not a good day for them, including at the Supreme Court. So let me
Right.
just that and say that I think that they're exposing and showing themselves in these first 100 days for what they are, in a way that is really undeniable, even to judges that the president himself has appointed or supported in the past. And so
Mhm.
I think that is a piece of what we have to say, whatever one might have thought the way the cookie might crumble at the Supreme Court a few months ago, we do have to some degree, I think, somewhat of a changed picture because this administration has chosen to really take, like I said, a gamble that I wouldn't be taking, to just stare down the judiciary as if as if we don't operate in a country where there are checks and balances and where the executive. That said, this is a Supreme Court that, in large part, was shaped and really by Donald Trump's first presidency, as we know and as you've written about. And so I think there are several areas where the administration is certainly thinking that the court will side with it along the lines on some immigration issues, potentially on civil rights, diversity, equity, inclusion issues, maybe some executive power issues. And so we're going to have to see how that plays out. But what we've been seeing is that, in a number of cases, judges who you might not think were as aligned with some of it, maybe even not the underlying policies or the opposition to the underlying policies, are really concerned about the lawless way in which the administration's operating, including in like not following basic procedures. I mean, on the funding freeze case is one example. Everybody wanted to talk about impoundment, and that's
Right.
certainly a constitutional issue. But in the funding freeze, they just flat out violated other protections, including the protection against arbitrary and capricious government that's in the Administrative Procedure Act. So I think that like some of these things, we're going to have to see how they tee up. But I wouldn't count the court out on some of them. That said, we also don't have rose colored glasses about the environment that we're in. But certainly the administration thought, and I think this was a bad, just a bad fight for them to pick, that they were just going to get to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court was going to rubber stamp everything. And so they could just play whack a mole up and down the federal court system. And you've seen the district courts and the appellate courts and even the Supreme Court have something very strong to say against that. We follow court orders, even district court orders in this country. And I think that might influence to some degree what the Supremes end up doing on some of the merits. But, I don't know. I don't know. What do
And
you
I
think?
think, I mean, I definitely think that the Cassis example is a good example from today. Obviously, I mean, the fact that over the course of it's in this case for the CFPB that he literally had a ruling earlier in the month where they were allowing a riff if there was a particularized assessment, and then today he was like, no, we're holding off. And then you saw a similar thing with the Alien Enemies Act, or not the Alien Enemies Act, with Kilmar Abrego Garcia, with the fact with Judge Wilkinson, who initially, when the Fourth Circuit was up on the stay, he wrote a concurrence saying basically still siding against the administration, but sort of like chastising his colleagues and saying, my colleagues think this is an easy case, but I think it's a complex issue. And then you fast forward after the administration's own behavior, and he wrote that blistering opinion saying this is a very clear case.
The seven
And
pages every American should read from Judge Wilkinson.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, so moving over to the Alien Enemies Act, I mean, I think the Alien Enemies Act is sort of uh, this this administration's version of the travel ban in terms of something that they bit off more than they could chew. They thought that they were going to have an easy way with it because it was something that they could claim was a clear presidential power, and yet they've sort of gotten pushback at every turn. And I think you can give us some insights into sort of like how that pushback happened from morning one, with the filing that we all woke up to on March 15th.
Well, it was a late night. It was a late night, but there have been many late nights around here and with our partners. But look, this was an issue. The story of this case, and we'll have to see how things turn out. And I really, I will tell you, we hope every single day and are working every single day to see if there's any way that our clients who were unlawfully removed will be able to be back. And then, of course, to protect people from this horrific
Yeah,
situation.
and we should. If people haven't read it, the obviously the amended complaint and the amended preliminary injunction does ask
That
for the people who were taken to El Salvador to be brought back to get the process that they were not given the first time.
Exactly. But I'll just say from the, this is one of those cases that when it's all said and done, I mean, there are just the president started announcing and gleefully bragging in the great hall of the Department of Justice. Right? That's what we have to remember about March 15th is you had that Department of Justice speech. And in his public remarks, he starts saying, and your people are going to wake up in the next morning and they're going to see what we did. That's what he said. He said it would be a beautiful thing, and
Mm.
they're gonna see what we did. And so that just smells like, right? And we know based on public reporting and based on the president's own statements, his associates' own statements, that they wanted to put in place, which he did, of course, in the dead of night, not publicly. Not publicly publicizing it until the next day. The Alien Enemies Act, which is a wartime power that has only been used in World War One, the War of 1812, and World War Two, and then on top of that, deprive people of process that even that act requires, which is when you have the DC Circuit Judge Millett saying, we gave people accused of being Nazis in this country more process in World War II than what this president and his administration has afforded here when we're not even at war, right? And so that getting into court, the ability to get into court that day on behalf of our five clients, we had actually asked, of course, for class certification, which Judge Boasberg provisionally issued later in the day. That was the very infamous hearing where it was clear he issued relief. The government didn't want to follow his order, didn't turn the planes around. But being able to get in early and to expose and show to the American people, right, who are fundamentally fair minded people, what was happening, I think really turned the tables. And then you have the fact that a judge issues an order and the administration gleefully over social media with a number of these officials like the Secretary of State almost bragging about the fact that they somehow felt as if they could avoid the court order. That there's no place for that in America. I mean, the public polling is clear. People disagree on a lot of things. They may not even like courts, but over 80% of people in poll after poll believe you follow court orders in this country. And so I think it was a real turning point where the administration wanted a made for TV moment. They wanted to be able to label people as gang members. Of course, they hadn't given anybody any process. They were
Right.
confident members don't avoid the process, go through the process. And what has happened now is I think the American people, including people who don't follow this stuff day in and day out, are starting to see really what's at stake. And as harmful as it is for the people that have suffered under this lack of process, I do think that what has happened and what is happening in the national conversation can provide us some amount of hope that the American people are getting to a point to say enough is enough of this. And we saw that in the opinion polls over the weekend where people saying, yeah, they're concerned about the economy, but they're also really concerned about the rule of law and due process because it just doesn't sit right with people that the president can do this.
I mean, I guess we're sort of coming up on a close here. I guess two things. Um, what are you going to be paying attention to most over the next month? And what do you want other people to be paying attention to? What should the people watching be paying attention to?
Well, I'm going to be paying attention to with the administration. I think we've got to start looking at the federal agencies because this 100 days has been shock and awe. What's the president going to sign? What's Elon Musk going to tweet about? All of that violates the law. It's deeply harmful. We got to get into court. But what you're going to see now is a range of agency officials. They're taking their positions and a
Hmm.
range of things that will happen that are not headline news but that nevertheless are unlawful and harmful and will affect millions of people if they're not detected and stopped. So that's everything from pulling back policies without providing appropriate public comment or explanation. It's everything from trying to manipulate data and evidence sources or put these people on commissions that shouldn't be there without transparency laws. So we're going to be really taking a look at that. That's one of our signature things at Democracy Forward is to make sure that we're not letting the shiny object, so to speak, distract from some of the real harm to people that there is legal recourse for if you get into court. And I think what I'd love for everyone else to pay attention to is to watch the pace of litigation and don't just look at the lawyers and the legal argument, but look at that heading of the complaint and who is showing up into court. Because when I look at it, even today, it tells a very hopeful story about this country, even though we're in a very difficult situation, because we have represented Baptists and Quakers and Republicans who have been fired by the president, and veterans and school teachers and conservationists and nonprofits who never thought they were ever going to go to court, and the American Bar Association and small businesses, and on and on and on. And almost in that picture that's painted from the top of the docket, you can see the chorus of the American people saying, not on our watch are we going to allow this to happen. We get to initiate litigation and we're going to do it to defend our rights. And I think paying attention to that over the next 100 days, who else comes in to the fray? We're representing some law
Right.
students, right? Because the law firms weren't going to challenge something unlawful that the EOC does. So now the law students are doing it. Who else comes into the fray? What can that tell us about our country? And what does that tell us about the path forward? I think that's something to definitely watch. And then, of course, everyone reads you, and we'll get your great Supreme Court commentary as the cases start coming down.
Well, we will certainly be paying attention, and I will be eagerly awaiting the next filing uh, from you all because certainly Democracy Forward has been one of the front organizations over the past 100 days, and so really appreciate you giving us some time today to talk about where we're at and where we're going.
Well, thank you so much. It's always good to see you, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks. Bye bye.